November 14th, 1942, 11:48 p.m., the Solomon Islands, South Pacific. Calvin Graham is loading a 5-inch naval gun when the first Japanese torpedo hits USS South Dakota. He's knocked flat. Metal shrieks. The deck buckles beneath him. Fire erupts from the bulkhead 3 feet away. He has approximately 90 seconds before the magazine he's standing next to cooks off and vaporizes everyone within a 40-foot radius. He's surrounded by 9 sailors, all screaming contradictory orders. The ship is listing 12 degrees to port. Emergency lighting has failed. He cannot see the shells he's supposed to be loading. Calvin does not run. He does not freeze. He starts singing. In situations like this, nighttime naval combat at close range against superior Japanese forces, casualty rates exceed 60%. The USS South Dakota is absorbing hits from 8 enemy ships simultaneously. Calvin has no training for magazine fire protocol. He has no protective gear rated for the temperatures now cooking the steel around him. He has no way to communicate with damage control. The math says he dies here. Every statistical model says he dies here. But Calvin Graham is about to extinguish a magazine fire, drag 3 wounded sailors to safety, and keep his gun battery operational through 4 hours of continuous combat. Because in the next 18 minutes, he will demonstrate a psychological trait the Navy couldn't have anticipated. Children don't always understand when they're supposed to be afraid. His advantage? He's the only person in this compartment who still believes adults know what they're doing. Calvin Wesley Graham, born April 3rd, 1930, Crockett, Texas, population 972. His father beat him with a razor strop, starting at age 7. By age 9, Calvin had learned the most important survival skill of his life, how to make grown men believe whatever he needed them to believe. He practiced his mother's signature until it was flawless. He lowered his voice until it cracked in exactly the right places. He discovered that if you act like you belong somewhere, people rarely check. But to understand how a 12-year-old became the youngest decorated combat veteran in American military history, you need to know what made him different from every other boy who dreamed of war. April 3rd, 1942. Houston, Texas, Calvin's 12th birthday. His stepfather lands a punch that fractures Calvin's left cheekbone. Calvin waits until 3 a.m., packs a canvas bag with 2 shirts and his mother's forged signature on a birth certificate that says he's 17, and walks to the Navy recruiting station on Travis Street. The recruiter is Petty Officer James Whitlock, 3 months from retirement, processing his 14th applicant of the day. Calvin walks with his shoulders back, speaks in the lowest register he can manage, says "sir" without being prompted. Whitlock glances at the birth certificate, looks at Calvin's face, bruised, swollen, but set with a determination that makes men uncomfortable to question. The Navy needs bodies. They've needed bodies since December 7th. Whitlock asks one question: "Can you swim?" Calvin lies, says yes. Whitlock stamps the paperwork. Calvin doesn't celebrate, doesn't smile, just asks when he ships out. 2 weeks, Whitlock says. Calvin nods once, asks if there's somewhere he can sleep until then. Whitlock, for reasons he'll never quite articulate, drives Calvin to the YMCA and pays for a week's room. Calvin shakes his hand, says thank you. Whitlock will remember this moment for the rest of his life, the boy who thanked him for helping him get to war. June 1942, Naval Training Station, San Diego, California. The boot camp is 8 weeks of designed humiliation. Calvin is 5'2", 105 pounds, surrounded by men who tower over him. Chief Petty Officer Daniel Morrison runs the company. Morrison is not kind, he's not patient. He's a 15-year veteran who's trained 3,000 sailors and can smell weakness at 50 yards. Week 2, Morrison orders the company to swim 400 yards in dress blues. This is where Calvin's lie dies. He cannot swim, has never learned. The only water in Crockett deep enough to drown in was the creek where his brother drowned at age 6. Calvin has spent 12 years avoiding that creek. Morrison blows the whistle. 53 recruits jump. Calvin jumps, goes under, surfaces gasping, goes under again. His boots fill with water. The wool uniform weighs 18 pounds when wet. He's sinking. Morrison is watching. Calvin makes a decision that defines his entire service. He does not call for help. He dog paddles, flails. He kicks, swallows half the pool, but he moves forward. 300 yards of drowning in slow motion. Other recruits pass him, lap him. Calvin doesn't stop, touches the wall after 14 minutes. Last to finish. Morrison is standing there. "You can't swim," Morrison says. "No, Chief." "You lied on your application." "Yes, Chief." Morrison stares at him for 8 seconds. "Why?" Calvin's answer is 6 words. "Needed to be somewhere else, Chief." Morrison doesn't report him. Instead, every morning at 0500 for 6 weeks, Morrison teaches Calvin to swim. No witnesses, no official record, just a chief petty officer who recognizes something he can't quite name. By graduation, Calvin swims the 400 yards in 8 minutes. Morrison shakes his hand, tells him he'll make a good sailor. Calvin believes him. This is the first time an adult has ever told Calvin he's good at something. August 1942, USS South Dakota, Pearl Harbor. The South Dakota is a battleship. 680 feet long, 35,000 tons, crew of 2,500. Calvin reports aboard as Seaman Second Class, assigned to the 5-inch gun battery on the starboard side. His gun captain is Gunner's Mate First Class Robert Chen. Chen is 28, Chinese-American, San Francisco. Chen has trained 47 sailors on this gun. He can field strip it blindfolded. He runs his crew like a surgical team because in combat, that's what they are. Chen takes one look at Calvin and says, How old are you?" Calvin says, 17, sir." Chen says, "I'm not an officer, don't call me sir, and you're not 17. Calvin goes silent. This is the moment. Chen has the authority to report him, have him removed, sent home, back to Texas, back to his stepfather's fists. Chen says, "I don't care how old you are. I care if you can do the job. Can you lift 65 pounds? The shells weigh 64 pounds each. Yes. The gunner's mate. Can you count to 400? The gun fires at 400 rounds per hour maximum sustained. Yes, gunner's mate. Can you follow orders without asking stupid questions? Yes, gunner's mate." Chen nods. "Then we don't have a problem. But if you freeze up in combat, I will throw you overboard myself. Not because I'm cruel, because one frozen sailor kills the entire crew. Understood?" "Understood." Chen never asks Calvin's age again. But every night for 3 weeks he drills Calvin on the gun procedures until Calvin can perform every operation in complete darkness. Load, aim, fire, clear, reload. Calvin's hands develop calluses, his shoulders strengthen, the shells get lighter. Chen watches, corrects, never praises. But one evening, cleaning the gun, Chen says, "You're slower than the others, but you don't make mistakes. Slow and right beats fast and dead." Calvin stores this sentence like ammunition. He will repeat it to himself in 94 days when the Japanese torpedoes hit and everything becomes fire. October 26, 1942. Battle of the Santa Cruz Islands. This is Calvin's first combat. The South Dakota engages Japanese aircraft at a range of 6,000 yards. Calvin's gun battery fires 117 rounds in 14 minutes. The noise is physics made audible. Each shot a concussive wave that rattles teeth and collapses thought into pure reaction. Calvin loads, Chen aims, but the gun fires. Calvin's world reduces to lift, slide, lock, clear, lift, slide, lock, clear. A Japanese Zero breaks through the screen, strafes the deck. 20-millimeter rounds chew through steel plating, 8 feet from Calvin's position. A shell fragment hits Seaman Timothy Walsh in the throat. Walsh drops. Blood everywhere. The gun crew freezes for 2 seconds. Chen screams, "Keep loading!" Calvin keeps loading. Lift, slide, lock, clear. He does not look at Walsh. Cannot look at Walsh. Walsh is making sounds Calvin has never heard humans make. The corpsman arrives, drags Walsh away. Calvin loads the next shell. His hands are shaking so badly he nearly drops it. Chen catches it, locks it himself, fires, turns to Calvin. "You're still here," Chen says. "Yes, gunner's mate." "Good, that's all, just good." But Chen's hand rests on Calvin's shoulder for 3 seconds. And Calvin understands this is the closest thing to affection he's going to receive in a war zone. And it's enough. The battle ends. The South Dakota survives. Calvin's battery is credited with downing 2 aircraft. Impossible to verify who hit what in the chaos, but Chen divides the credit equally among his crew. Calvin's name appears in the after-action report. He is 12 years old. He has killed people. Probably, this thought arrives 3 days later during a quiet moment, and Calvin vomits over the side of the ship for 4 minutes. Chen finds him, says nothing, hands him water, waits. Finally, first time's the worst. It doesn't get easier, but you get used to carrying it. Calvin asks, "Does it ever stop?" Chen says, "No, and if it does, you've become something you don't want to be." Calvin will remember this conversation for 72 years. It's the only honest thing anyone ever tells him about killing, but nothing. Not boot camp, not Santa Cruz, not Chen's training, prepares Calvin for what happens next. November 14th, 1942, Guadalcanal. The night the USS South Dakota takes 42 direct hits, and Calvin Graham becomes the youngest person ever to receive the Bronze Star and Purple Heart. This is how he earned it. November 14th, 1942, 11:31 p.m., 17 minutes before the first torpedo. The South Dakota is running dark, no lights, radio silence. They're sailing in formation with USS Washington, hunting Japanese supply convoys near Savo Island. Calvin is at his battle station, the number 3 loader on the starboard 5-inch battery. The crew has been at general quarters for 6 hours. Men are eating cold beans from cans, smoking despite regulations. The waiting is worse than combat. Combat is decisions made at neural speed. Waiting is every fear given time to metastasize. Chen briefs the gun crew. Intelligence reports 8 to 12 Japanese ships in the area. The South Dakota's job is to screen the Washington while the big guns do the killing. "We're not here to be heroes," Chen says. "We're here to keep the aircraft off Washington so she can sink their battleships. Simple job, don't complicate it." Calvin checks his powder charges, counts them twice. 12 ready rounds in the loading tray. Another 60 in the magazine below. Everything organized according to Chen's system. Fastest access, minimal movement, maximum efficiency. Calvin's hands are steady now. He's been in combat. He knows the sounds. He knows the rhythm. He's ready. At 11:43 p.m., radar picks up the Japanese fleet, 14 ships, closer than expected. The gunnery officer's voice crackles over the intercom. All batteries prepared to engage surface targets. Range, 9,000 yards and closing. Chen turns to his crew. His face is completely calm. "Remember your training. Watch your intervals. If I go down, Doug Graham takes the gun captain position." This is insane. Calvin is the least experienced crew member, but Chen has seen something in the last 3 weeks. Calvin doesn't panic. Calvin doesn't improvise. Calvin follows procedures exactly, and in situations where half the crew might die in the next hour, predictability is more valuable than experience. At 11:48 p.m., the Japanese open fire first. The first shell hits the forward superstructure. See, Calvin feels it through the deck, a shudder that travels through 35,000 tons of steel. The second shell hits the port side. Calvin counts. 8 seconds between impacts. The Japanese have good range. The South Dakota returns fire. Calvin's gun battery engages. The first shot leaves the barrel and Calvin's ears pop from the pressure wave. The second shot, the third. Chen is calling ranges. The gun is traversing. The powder smoke is so thick Calvin can't see the ocean. The problem, visibility drops to 15 feet. Solution, Chen installed luminous tape on every critical surface. Calvin can see the loading tray, can see the shell racks, can see Chen's hand signals. Complication, the ship starts evasive maneuvers. The deck tilts. Calvin is loading uphill, then downhill, then uphill again. Each shell weighs 64 pounds and Calvin weighs 105. Adaptation, Calvin doesn't fight the tilt, learns to load with the roll, uses the ship's momentum. The Chen notices, nods once. The fourth shell hits directly above them. The overhead lights explode. Glass and sparks rain down. The backup lights engage. Everything is red now. Emergency lighting casting shadows that make depth impossible to judge. Calvin misjudges the distance to the loading tray, drops a shell, it rolls. A 64-pound high-explosive shell, rolling loose on a tilting deck. Chen doesn't hesitate, plants his foot, stops it, picks it up, loads it, fires it, turns to Calvin. "None again," Chen says. "Just that. No anger, no fear, just again." Calvin loads the next shell perfectly. 11:52 p.m., the torpedo hits. Calvin doesn't hear it. The explosion is so close it bypasses sound and becomes pure pressure. He's on the deck. The ceiling is where the floor should be. No, he's still upright. The ship rolled. The gun mount twisted 20 degrees. Hydraulic fluid is spraying from a ruptured line. The fluid is flammable. The fluid is spraying directly onto hot metal. This is how ships die, not from enemy fire, from their own systems catastrophically failing in exactly the right sequence to create unstoppable fires. Problem, hydraulic fire in 17 seconds. Solution, Chen is screaming at someone to close the valve. Complication, the valve is in the deck plating, now buried under 3 wounded sailors who were knocked down by the blast. Adaptation, Calvin doesn't think, drops to the deck, crawls under the bodies, finds the valve. He burns his hand on the metal wheel. It's been heated by the fire that's already starting. Turns it anyway. The spray stops. The fire dies before it becomes uncontrollable. Calvin crawls out. His right hand is blistered. 2nd-degree burns across the palm and 3 fingers. Chen looks at the hand, looks at Calvin. "Can you still load?" Calvin makes a fist. It hurts. He can load. "Yes, gunner's mate." "Then load." The South Dakota is taking hits every 45 seconds now. The Japanese have found the range. Shell after shell slams into the armor belt. The superstructure, the deck plating, the battleship can absorb it. It's designed to absorb it. But the crew can't. Men are dying. Calvin can hear it through the bulkheads, the screaming, the corpsmen calling for stretchers, the officers trying to maintain order through damaged communication systems. 12:08 a.m. The fire starts in the magazine. Calvin smells it before he sees it. The powder smoke has a specific chemical signature. This is different. This is electrical fire, insulation burning. Then he sees the smoke, thick, black, rolling up from the ammunition hoist. The magazine is directly below them. The magazine contains 60,000 pounds of high explosives. If it cooks off, everyone within 100 feet dies instantly. Everyone within 300 feet dies from the blast wave. The South Dakota might survive. Might. But this entire section of the ship will cease to exist. Chen sees it, grabs the intercom. Fire in Magazine 3. Request damage control to... The intercom is dead. The communication line was severed by the torpedo hit. Chen looks at his crew, 5 sailors, all staring at the smoke, all doing the same math. Chen makes a decision. Abandon the mount. Get to the weather deck. Now. 4 sailors run. Calvin doesn't move. Chen turns. Graham. That was an order. Who's going to help you close the magazine doors? The magazine doors are manual, designed to be operated by 2 men, heavy steel hatches that seal the magazine from fire. If they close those doors, the magazine might not cook off, might survive long enough for damage control to flood it. But closing them requires going down the ladder, into the smoke, into the heat, and manually cranking 2 wheels that require 180 pounds of force to turn. Calvin weighs 105 pounds. Chen weighs 160. Neither of them can do this alone. Chen's face does something Calvin has never seen before. It takes Calvin 3 seconds to recognize the expression. Respect. All right, Chen says. Let's go. They descend into the smoke. The heat is immediate. Calvin's eyes water, can't breathe. The smoke is thick enough to block vision beyond 2 feet. Chen ties a rag around Calvin's face, ties one around his own. They find the doors by touch. Each door has a wheel, but Chen takes the port door. Calvin takes the starboard. They begin cranking. Problem, the wheel won't turn. The heat has expanded the metal. The doors are jammed. Solution, Chen wedges a pry bar into the wheel. Spokes for leverage. Complication, the pry bar slips. Chen's hand is in the way. The bar smashes across his knuckles. Chen bites back a scream. His hand is broken. Adaptation. Calvin doesn't wait for orders. Grabs the pry bar. Uses his entire body weight. The wheel moves 1 inch. 2 inches. The door is closing, but Calvin's door won't move at all. The starboard wheel is completely seized. Chen sees it, crosses to Calvin's side. Together, using the pry bar and both their weights, they force the wheel. It turns, grinding, protesting, but turning. The doors close. The magazine is sealed. They climb back up. The smoke is worse now. Calvin can't see, can't breathe, feels Chen's hand on his shoulder, guiding him. They emerge onto the gun deck. The fire is still burning, but it's contained. It's manageable. It's not going to vaporize half the ship. Calvin collapses, coughs for 90 seconds straight. Chen is doing the same. When Calvin's vision clears, he sees the gun mount. It's unmanned. The rest of the crew evacuated. It's just the 2 of them. And the South Dakota is still in combat, still taking fire, still needs their gun operational. Chen looks at his broken hand, looks at Calvin's burned hand. Can you load? Yes, gunner's mate. I can't aim. Can you aim? Calvin has watched Chen aim for 3 months, has memorized every adjustment, every calculation. I think so. That's good enough. For the next 40 minutes, Calvin Graham, age 12, with 2nd-degree burns on his right hand, serves as gun captain. Chen loads with his left hand and gives corrections. Calvin adjusts the elevation and traverse wheels. They fire 73 more rounds. Don't hit anything, probably, but they're firing. And in naval combat, suppressive fire keeps enemy aircraft cautious, and cautious aircraft don't drop torpedoes accurately, and that's worth more than confirmed kills. At 12:47 a.m., the Japanese disengage. At 1:15 a.m., the South Dakota secures from general quarters. At 1:23 a.m., Calvin vomits from pain and adrenaline crash. Chen sits next to him, doesn't speak, just sits. At 2 a.m., the executive officer inspects the damage, finds Calvin and Chen still at their station. The XO looks at the sealed magazine doors. looks at Calvin's burned hand, looks at Chen's broken hand. Who sealed the magazine? We did, sir, Chen says. Both of you? Yes, sir. The XO stares at Calvin for 10 seconds. How old are you, sailor? Calvin's voice is hoarse from smoke. 12, sir. The XO blinks. Say again. I'm 12 years old, sir. The XO doesn't respond immediately, looks at Chen. Did you know? I knew he wasn't 17. Sir. Did you report it? No, sir. Why not? Chen's answer is 5 words. He can do the job, sir. The XO looks back at Calvin, at his burned hand, at the blisters already forming, at the powder residue covering his uniform, at the blood on his sleeve from a shrapnel cut Calvin didn't even notice until now. The XO has been in the Navy for 19 years. He's seen sailors freeze. He's seen sailors run. He's seen sailors lie. He's never seen anything like this. Get to sick bay, the XO says. Both of you, that's an order. The corpsman treats Calvin's burns, 2nd degree. Will scar. The corpsman treats Chen's hand. 3 broken bones, will heal in 8 weeks. The corpsman asks Calvin his age. Calvin tells the truth. The corpsman tells the doctor tells the captain. By dawn, everyone knows. Calvin waits for the consequences, the discharge, the court-martial, the disgrace. What he receives instead is a Bronze Star for meritorious service during combat operations and a Purple Heart for wounds received in action against an enemy of the United States. The awards ceremony happens 3 days later. The captain pins the medals to Calvin's uniform, shakes his hand, whispers, "Don't let anyone tell you this wasn't real." Calvin doesn't understand what he means. Not yet, but he will. November 17th, 1942. Pearl Harbor. The South Dakota limps into port with 42 shell holes, a torpedo hit, and 38 dead sailors. The press is waiting. The Navy has been taking losses since Pearl Harbor. They need a victory story. The South Dakota provided one, helped sink the Japanese battleship Kirishima. The reporters interview the crew. Someone mentions the 12-year-old. The story spreads like fire through dry grass. By November 20th, Calvin's face is in newspapers across America. A boy hero of the South Dakota. His mother sees it, recognizes him despite the Navy uniform, contacts the press, says her son was kidnapped by military recruiters. The Navy panics, launches an investigation, discovers the forged birth certificate, the falsified enlistment papers, the fact that a 12-year-old served in combat and nobody checked. December 1st, 1942. Calvin is officially discharged. Not honorably. The Navy can't honorably discharge someone who was never legally enlisted. The medals are revoked. The service record is sealed. The Bronze Star and Purple Heart are physically taken from him by a supply officer who apologizes while doing it. Calvin doesn't fight, doesn't argue, just hands them over. Chen finds him before he leaves the ship, gives him something wrapped in a handkerchief. Inside, the spent shell casing from the first round they fired together after sealing the magazine. You earned this, Chen says. They can't take what you earned. Calvin keeps that shell casing for the rest of his life. January 1943, Houston, Texas. Calvin is home. His stepfather is waiting. The first punch breaks Calvin's nose. The second cracks a rib. Calvin doesn't fight back, just covers up, survives. The next morning, he walks to the Army recruiting station on Congress Avenue. New recruiter, new forged papers. Says he's 18 now, more believable. The recruiter believes him. Calvin serves 11 months in the Army, never sees combat, works in a supply depot in California. It's boring, it's safe, it's everything he doesn't need. In December 1943, his mother contacts the Army. Same story. Kidnapped, underage. The Army investigates, discovers the second lie, discharges him again, this time with a dishonorable discharge for fraudulent enlistment. Calvin is 13 years old with 2 discharges and no medals. The newspapers which celebrated him in November 1942 ignore the story in December 1943. America has moved on. Guadalcanal is old news. The war is in Italy now, then France, then Germany. Calvin becomes a footnote, a curiosity, the boy who lied his way into the Navy. But what the newspapers miss is the pattern. Calvin didn't enlist twice because he loved war. He enlisted twice because returning to Texas meant returning to his stepfather's fists. And Calvin had learned in the South Pacific that he'd rather face Japanese torpedoes than the randomized violence of domestic abuse. The military gave him structure, rules, predictability. In combat, at least you know what's trying to kill you. 1944 to 1951. Houston, Texas. Calvin works odd jobs. Welding, construction, merchant marine for 2 years. Gets married at 18, divorced at 20, married again at 22, 7 children. The marriages don't last. But Calvin can't explain the nightmares, can't explain why he flinches at loud noises, can't explain why he volunteers for the most dangerous work, because it's the only time his hands stop shaking. He's diagnosed with war neurosis in 1949. No treatment available. They give him aspirin and tell him to get over it. In 1951, Calvin writes a letter to the Navy, requests his service record be corrected, requests his medals be restored. The Navy responds that no record exists of his service because he was never legally enlisted. The medals cannot be restored because they were never officially awarded. Calvin frames this letter, hangs it next to the shell casing Chen gave him. One morning in 1953, Calvin's 7-year-old son asks about the shell casing. Calvin tells him the story, all of it, the forged papers, the torpedo, the magazine fire. The son asks, "Were you scared?" Calvin thinks for a long time. Every second. But being scared wasn't permission to stop. His son remembers this sentence for 60 years. 1977. The Navy begins reviewing old discharges. A researcher discovers Calvin's case, realizes that Calvin served in combat, was wounded in action, performed admirably under fire. The dishonorable discharge is upgraded to honorable, but the medals are not restored. The Navy maintains that because he was never legally enlisted, the medals cannot be officially awarded. The technicality survives. Now, Calvin doesn't care anymore. He's worked as a welder for 34 years, has grandchildren. The war is distant now, faded. Other veterans have reunions. Calvin doesn't attend. His service doesn't officially exist. He's not invited. 1988. President Ronald Reagan signs legislation allowing the Navy to restore Calvin's medals. The Bronze Star and Purple Heart are officially re-awarded 46 years after he earned them. Calvin is 58 years old. The ceremony happens in a VFW hall in Houston. 43 people attend, no press. Calvin wears his old uniform. It doesn't fit. He's gained weight, lost hair. The young sailor is gone. But when the medals are pinned to his chest, something strange happens. Calvin stands straighter. His hands, shaking from age and old trauma, go still. For 90 seconds, he's 23 again, 33, 12, all at once. The reporter who does attend asks Calvin what the moment means to him. Calvin says, "It means I'm not a liar." November 6, 1992, Fort Worth, Texas. Calvin dies of heart failure at age 62. He's buried in Fort Sam Houston National Cemetery, Section MG, Site 265. His headstone lists his rank, Seaman 2nd Class. His awards, Bronze Star, Purple Heart. His dates, 1930 to 1992. No mention that he was 12 when he earned them. No mention that he lied to get there. No mention that the Navy spent decades denying he existed. So his oldest daughter places the shell casing from Chen in his casket. She doesn't tell anyone. It's between Calvin and the war. There are two ways to tell Calvin Graham's story. The first is as inspiration. Boy lies his way into Navy, becomes hero, proves courage has no age requirement. The second is as tragedy. Child soldier traumatized by war, abandoned by system, denied recognition for decades. Both are true. Both are documented. But here's what matters. Calvin wasn't trying to be a hero. He was trying to escape. The Navy was safer than Texas. Combat was more predictable than his stepfather. He didn't serve his country out of patriotism. He served because the alternative was worse. And when the moment came, when the magazine was burning and everyone else ran, Calvin stayed not because he was brave, but because Chen had taught him that the job comes first. And Calvin had spent 12 years learning that following the rules, even arbitrary, stupid rules like keep loading even when you're dying, was the only reliable way to survive. The American military has minimum age requirements for good reason. Children should not fight wars, should not see what Calvin saw, should not carry what Calvin carried. But the uncomfortable truth that makes this story worth telling is this: Calvin wasn't damaged by the war. Calvin arrived damaged. The war gave him structure, purpose, adults who told him clearly what they expected and rewarded him when he delivered. For 13 months, Calvin had the most stable, predictable, affirming environment of his entire childhood. And it was a battleship in the middle of the Pacific being torpedoed by the Japanese. What does that say about the home he escaped? In 1988, during the medal ceremony, a reporter asked Calvin if he had any regrets. Calvin thought for a long time. Finally said, "I regret that I had to lie. I don't regret what I did once I got there." That's the story, not the heroism, not the medals, not the improbable survival. The story is a 12-year-old who decided that loading ammunition under fire was preferable to waiting for his stepfather to come home drunk and being correct about that calculation. Some things you never stop being. Calvin never stopped being the boy who needed structure so badly he forged his way into war to find it. You never stopped being the sailor who learned that following procedures exactly every time, without exception, was the only reliable path between chaos and survival. Never stopped being the man who understood that fear wasn't permission to stop, and stopping wasn't an option when other people depended on you staying. Chen taught him that. Or maybe Calvin already knew it, and Chen just gave him permission to believe it. Either way, Calvin carried it until his heart gave out at 62, and they buried him with the shell casing that proved it was real, and his daughter never told anyone because some truths don't require witnesses. They just require you to keep loading, even when everything is burning, because the job isn't finished and stopping means everyone dies. Calvin understood that at 12. Most people never understand it at all.